Hey guys, welcome back to another PUBG Xbox video, and this is a big one because today we're looking at tips and strategies to help you guys win more solo games in PUBG. And for those of you who are kind of new to PUBG and perhaps haven't won many, if any, solo games yet, there's no need to despair. Personally, it took me about 40 to 50 games before I got my first solo chicken dinner, and even then they didn't come easily. However, over my time playing PUBG, I've really learned the strategies and tips that help you to get deep into games, and lately I feel like I've really developed a formula where I can get myself to the top 1 or 2 on a pretty consistent basis. So we'll be focusing primarily on endgame strategy when you get down to the last 10 to 15 players, and I feel like the best way to present this is in a top tips format. So we're going to go for the top 5 tips to help you guys win more games. So that's what we're looking at today. Stick around and I hope you guys find this video helpful. And if you do, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on similar content in the future. Tip number 1 is about how to effectively use cover and what the best types of cover are given your situation. In my opinion, the best type of cover is what we call dead ground, which is by definition an area of ground that is hidden from observers due to undulations in the land. So what you'll see me doing on a pretty consistent basis is using dead ground to hide myself from view from one direction and then scanning the opposite direction to make sure that I'm not vulnerable. So in this example, I do just that. I clear the area to my north and then proceed to the fight knowing that I'm relatively safe from behind. The next thing to take into account when talking about types of cover is the concept of peak areas. And this idea is especially important if you're playing in third-person servers. So in this situation here, although I'm in a great position in terms of the circle, there is a pretty good chance that once this next circle comes in, I'm going to have to push across this open field. And the peak of this hill is a great position for someone to set up and wait for me to run out into the open before lighting me up. So it's always worthwhile being aware of these types of areas. And if you're not in a situation where you can avoid them, then it's best to play aggressively and clear that area. So what you can see here is that I push early and use the dead ground to flank my opponent. So at the time I didn't actually know that this guy was here, but I had a pretty good idea that that would be a great area for someone to camp out. So I decided to push and it definitely paid off. And again, you can see here that as I move into this next fight, I use the dead ground to hide myself from the guy to my left, while scanning the area to my right. On a side note, I personally feel that trees are the worst type of cover that you can use. This is because although you're well protected from one direction, you remain completely exposed from the other directions. So I'll generally only use trees as cover if it's a last resort or if I'm in a one-on-one fight. Tip number 2 is about being very careful when you choose to unequip your primary weapon. On too many occasions, I've died from having my sniper equipped or equipping a frag grenade, because it obviously takes time to re-equip your primary weapon. Earlier on in PUBG, I used to use grenades quite a lot during endgame, although nowadays I use them only as a last resort or if I'm confident that I can get the kill. You'll also see me swapping between my primary and secondary weapon quite often, especially if it's a sniper, but I pretty quickly switch back to my primary weapon if I can't get a shot off. Tip number 3, understanding the benefits of jumping when running, especially during endgame. So you guys will notice that I jump quite often, especially when I know that there's an opponent nearby. You'll also notice that the main times that I jump are when I'm approaching an area of dead ground that I can't see over. The reason for this is that firstly, it makes you a more awkward target for people to shoot at. But the main benefit is that there's a brief period of time where your character is in the air and not making any sound with footsteps. This gives you a great opportunity to hear where your opponents are. And because the audio in PUBG is very specific, if you have a decent set of headphones, then you can pinpoint pinpoint exactly where your opponent is at any given time, provided that they are moving. This strategy also has the double effect of your opponents not being able to hear where you are for a short period in time. The only downfall or thing to be careful of when using this strategy is to make sure that you're not jumping downhill, because your character will spend an extended period of time in the air, and that makes you an easy target. Tip number 4. Opportunistic movement. Essentially, any movement that you make during endgame could determine your fate, so choosing the right time to move can be tricky. Generally in PUBG, the best times to move are when there's gunfire, because you know that people are preoccupied in a fight, and most other players are also probably looking in that direction to make sure that they're not getting involved. This strategy also works really well if you're pushing towards that fight, because often you'll come in just in time to clean up the scraps. One of the other best times to move for cover is when you've tagged your opponent. This is a great example here where I'm pinned down behind a rock outside the circle, and my only hope for cover is to push across this open field. You can see that as soon as I land a shot, my first thought process is to move. And it pays off because, as expected, my opponent is healing. Tip number 5, and probably the most important of the tips, is circle management. In one of my earlier videos, we touched on the concept of the wedge and how this is important during endgame. But as a bit of a refresher, the wedge is essentially the narrowest area between the blue zone and the new white circle. And it's always best to try and be positioned somewhere near the wedge, as you'll be given the most amount of time to push late into the circle. So what are the benefits of being able to push late into the circle? Well, let's revisit the concept of flushing out the rats. The idea is that as the circle starts to move in, all the sneaky little boys who have been hiding in the bushes or snaking their way through the dead ground are forced to move into the circle. So by rolling left and right along the perimeter of the blue zone, you're able to catch these guys off guard, while also ensuring that no one pushes in behind you as you find cover in the new zone. One of the things to keep in mind during endgame is that if your character is outside the zone, you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So if you decide to make contact in this situation, it's generally best to make sure that you're already inside the circle or confident that you can make light work of your opponent. So obviously you can't always be near the wedge, but in situations when you're caught on the fat side, it's always best to try and move early and get as close to the wedge as you can. But in these situations, it's important to note that you're fighting an uphill battle, and chances are that there'll already be people near the wedge who are blessed with the gift of time and waiting for you to move in. So what's the best thing to do in this situation? Well, we just covered it. Refer back to tip 4, opportunistic movement. So that about does it for this video, guys. As always, thanks heaps for watching, and I really hope that this helps you guys to win more solo games in PUBG. So have a good one, and I'll catch you all in the next video.